Hello everyone, this is my first English video and today I'm going to briefly talk about the history, the prehistory and history of southern China and Southeast Asia. So roughly from 40,000 years ago to present day. Um, yes, I wanted to talk about this for a long time, but I didn't have time. So today I think it will be a good time to give you guys a brief introduction to the history of this hitherto rather ignored region. So English is not my first language, as you can see. As you can probably already tell from my accent, so please bear with me. So yes, so we have here Meng Day, which is the Zhuang way to say hello, and the Zhuang is a Tai-Kadai language spoken in southern China, and the other one is I think it's pronounced as Niuzhong, which is the Hmong way to say hello, pronounced like Niuzhong. So this is just my brief introduction. So yes, so as I said, this region is hitherto not well studied for multiple reasons. First is that there's a lack of public interest. Yes, and the second reason is because some historians assume that the history of this region is not very interesting compared to the one from the north, like the Eurasian steppe, where the majority of trade and movement seem to have occurred. You know, the Silk Road and the steppe, the Hans, etc. And also, there's another reason I think. In China and the Sinosphere in general, the mainstream view of history is rather Sinocentric and always focused on the Central Plains and Northern China, but not really in the south, in Southern China and Southeast Asia. So, due to the aforementioned reasons, the history of this region is still rather unknown to most people, and there are some controversies surrounding it. So, yes. So, I'm just going to give a general idea of the history of this region and debunk some far-fetched claims, and also offer a different view from the main Confucian and Sinocentric historiography of East Asia. So my presentation will focus mostly on southern China and with some mentioning of Southeast Asia, because my knowledge of Southeast Asian history that isn't that good, I would say. I know some of it, but not very clearly. So my main focus will be southern China, and I will mostly focus on the period from prehistory, that is around roughly like 40,000 years ago up until the 16th and 17th centuries. And lastly, I'll try to debunk some of the misleading claims or far-fetched claims that Japonic and Koreanic peoples originated from this region, which I think is very misleading, and there's no supporting evidence for such claims. And since I'm not a professional historian, so I'm only an amateur historian, so there might be some mistakes in my presentation. Yes, so without further ado, let's embark on this historical adventure. So this is just the introduction to the Hoabinian culture. I hope that I haven't butchered the name. The Hoabinian culture. So it was the first significant stone tool tradition associated with Homo sapiens found in this region, found in the region of southern China and Southeast Asia. And there were probably other hominins living in this area at that time, probably some Denisovans or possibly even Neanderthals, but mostly Denisovans, I would assume. And the term was coined by a French archaeologist, Madeleine Colany. Again, I hope I haven't butchered that name, Madeleine Colany, since she was the first the first one to discover such tools during her excavations in the northern Vietnamese province Hoa Binh in the year 1927. So as a result of her work and the Hoa Binian, the first Congress of Prehistorians of the Far East defined the Hoa Binian culture as a culture of composed composed of implements. So the generally flaked stone tools with rather primitive workmanship. So yes, so it's rather different from the microlith tools that was typically found in the northern part of Eurasia. So following the archaeological excavations and surveys in the Mae Hong Son province, Chester Gorman, 1970, so he proposed a more detailed definition. So he say the Hoa Binian stone tools are generally unifacial, flaked tools, and they were made by water-rounded pebbles and large flakes. Yeah, and the core tools made by complete flaking on one side of a pebble, and a high incidence of used flakes. Fairly similar assemblages of food remains, including shellfish, fish, and small to medium-sized mammals. Yes, cultured ecological orientation to use the rock shelters, and also edge grinding and cord-marked ceramics. I think the early ceramics was also found in southern China, in the Jiangxi province, around which was dated to 20,000 years ago. So subsequently, subsequent archaeological findings have shown that the Hoa Binian industry was not unique to Vietnam, but also existed in other surrounding regions such as South China, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. So the earliest Hoa Binian site discovered so far was the Xiaodong Rock Shelter in Lincang County in Yunnan Province, near the border with Myanmar. Actually, it was a site located about 20 kilometers to the border with Myanmar, and the age of the culture was estimated to be 43,500 years ago. So as you can see, there is mostly rather primitive pebble tools. Yes, another interesting thing is that freshwater snails and mollusks, and which the Hoa Binian consumed in great quantities, are still considered as a delicacy in parts of southern China today. So yes, they would be stir-fried with spices. Actually, there's an invasive species in the region. So there's a Brazilian snails which were imported, but they were invasive. And the Brazilian snails, compared to the original Asian freshwater snails, they have more parasites. So so yes, it's better to consume the Asian snails rather than the Brazilian snails, because not only the Asian ones taste better, the meat is more tender, and also it has less parasites compared to the Brazilian one. And no matter which species you are eating, you have to eat them cooked. You never eat them raw. That's my advice if you are going to travel there. Never eat the snails raw. Always cooked. So yes, this is a general distribution of the Hoa Binian culture. As we can see that its range extended across Southeast Asia, and even into parts of India and New Guinea. Okay, so some recent genetic evidence regarding the Hoa Binian. So the Hoa Binian, as we can see in this pie chart, they are not really closely related to modern East Asians. As we can see, they have a lot of South Indian South Indian genome, as well as West African, East African, and Papuan. So they are not really closely related to modern East Asians. So yes, so according to McCall and al., 2018, the 8,000-year-old LA368 Hoabinian individual from Laos belonged to Y chromosome haplogroup C star and mitochondrial haplogroup M5. But subsequent investigation have assigned this individual to the clade C1b K150. So it's a rare clade. I believe you can still be found in parts of South China and Southeast Asia. So there are three rare clades in the region. So C1b, that's one, and the other one is D1A1A2 F1070, and also another one is F2-M427. So all these clades are potentially related to the Hoabinians, whereas the haplogroup O only moved south later at around 5,000 years ago. So yes, and also it's interesting to note that the Hoabinians were quite tall for their time. So the LA368 individual measured 176 centimeters. So 176 centimeters, that was already quite tall compared to the ancient East Asian samples, who only average around 160 or 165. So he would be like an ostrich standing among a group of chickens, if he would be alive in East Asia at that time. So now we are entering the Neolithic age, which roughly spans between 10,000 to 4,000 years before present. So yes, things will get a bit complicated. And yes, for the ease of understanding, so we need to divide the southern China into two regions, yes. The Yangtze River Valley and the far south China. So the Yangtze River Valley was the birthplace of the rice agriculture, and the far south and southwest China remained hunter-gathering, and only entered the agricultural era sometime between 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. So let's start with the Yangtze River Valley. So the earliest Neolithic culture appearing in the lower Yangtze region was the Shangshan culture. So it was discovered in Zhejiang province, and according to C14 dating, so the carbonated rice grains can be dated back to 11,000 to 8,000 years ago. So that would make it the earliest evidence of rice farming. And they also had some grinding tools and some ceramic jars, possibly serve as vessels to preserve food, to process and to preserve food. So the second culture from this region is the Hemudu culture, which roughly spanned from 7,000 to 5,000 years ago. So yes, even more carbonated rice grains have been found at the Hemudu site, and they also had some black pottery and some wooden posts of the stilted houses, and also some small plows made of wood or bone. The next culture appearing in this region is the Liangzhu culture, which spanned around 5,300 to 4,000 years ago. So Liangzhu was a major center with cities, walls, and complex dikes and other irrigation systems. Many jade objects have been found in the Liangzhu tombs. They usually have the circular shape, and they also had some black potteries, which are more of better quality than the previous Hemudu. And also in the middle reaches of the Yangtze region, there were successive Neolithic cultures as well, such as Pengtoushan, Gaomiao, Youziling, and Qujialing, and Shijiahe, just to name a few. Yes, and they also had rice agriculture and jade objects, similar to the lower Yangtze region. And they also experienced a downfall roughly around the same time, around 4,000 years ago. And the cause of the downfall could be floods or wars, invasion from the north. It is generally believed that the ones from the lower Yangtze region might be related to Austronesians, whereas the cultures from the middle Yangtze region might be either Austroasiatic or Hmong-Mien. So moving on to the Neolithic cultures of far south China. So in this region, the cultures are much less impressive, I would say, because it's not really agriculture, but rather hunter-gathering. So all these cultures, from Zheng Piyan to Li Yudun to Guye, they are mostly relied on hunter-gathering, and their primary food is freshwater mollusks and fish. And the rice only appeared around 4 to 5,000 years ago, so fairly late. But they might have a different type of agriculture, they gather tubers and taros as food sources, rather than cereals like millet or rice. So here, basically showing some tools and equipment. So as we can see, they have some fairly large stone axes. Presumably, they would use this as tools to cut down trees or bamboos, but they could also very well be used as weapons. And they also had some perforated shell knives, which presumably were also used as cutting tools. And I also wanted to show you guys the skull, because in my opinion the skull feature is somewhat different from modern East Asians, because the skull, as you can see, is dolichocephalic, meaning that the skull is rather elongated, and the facial width is rather narrow. But compared to modern East Asians, the modern East Asians have rather brachycephalic skull shape and rather wide faces, so it's different from the early Neolithic South Chinese. So yes, finishing up the Neolithic period, we're moving on to the Bronze Age, which roughly spans from 4,000 years ago to the 2nd century BC. So at this time, the Yangtze River Valley had gradually begun to be Sinicized. So for this reason, we'll mostly focus on southwest China and also far south China. So one of the most impressive Bronze Age culture of southwest China is the Sanxingdui culture. It was discovered near the city of Guanghan in Sichuan province. Yes, and the estimated age of this site is between 2,800 to 1100 BC. So the Chinese archaeologists found many bronze objects at this site. So we had bronze masks, very large bronze masks with protruding eyes and ears that fanning out. So very bizarre bronze masks. And we also have golden masks with similar features. And there's also a bronze tree, 4-meter tall bronze tree, so very exquisite, exotic looking bronze tree. So many of these objects look very different from the ones in northern China. and researches about this Sanxingdui culture are ongoing. But compared to the Sanxingdui culture, other Bronze Age cultures in far south China and southwest China are much less impressive. So right next to Sanxingdui, the ancient Shu culture, there was the ancient Ba culture, which centered around Chongqing and the western part of Hubei. So the bronze artifacts found in those places look much less exotic, and they would often have a tiger motif. So the reason why they would often have the tiger motif is because the ancient Ba people, they worshipped white tigers. They saw white tigers as one of their ancestors. So as we can see, we have a vessel here with a tiger motif on top, and here we also have a dagger axe with a tiger motif on the blade. And so the most interesting aspect of the ancient Ba culture was not really their bronze artifact, but their burial tradition of hanging coffins. So they would place some branches on cliffs, and they would put the coffin on top of these branches. And such tradition originated from the southeast China, I believe around the Fujian province, but then it gradually spread to the southwest, first to Jiangxi and then to Hubei and finally to southwest China. So other than southern China, hanging coffins have also been found in Thailand and in the Philippines. So it's not just limited to China. And there is another culture which is the Dian culture, found in Yunnan province. So the bronze culture, so the bronze artifacts from the Dian culture, mostly they have a tiger. No, they have a buffalo motif, and also other animal motifs. Here we can see that it's a bronze vessel with the mother buffalo protecting protecting her calf from tiger attacks. And here we can see that several soldiers, presumably wearing bronze or leather armor and carrying dagger axes, and they also had a buffalo and some sheep. So this culture might be influenced by cultures from the Eurasian steppe, because at the same period, so the bronze vessels unearthed from the Eurasian steppe also had animal motifs. So there might be some connection. Yeah, and last but not least, the Bronze Age cultures of far south China. So this region was mostly known for their short bronze dagger axes like this one, which is of a different shape from the swords found in the north. And they also had like boot-shaped bronze axes. And they can make like very big and round and very large, big and round bronze drums, and the diameter of this drum can reach 1 or 2 meters or even larger. So it's not some small drums. And the bronze drums are the symbol of prestige for the cultures of far south China. So this type of bronze drums first appeared in the Dongsong culture, and then gradually spread to South China as well as other parts of Southeast Asia. And there's also a Bronze Age culture in Thailand called the Banqiang culture, but due to limited time, I'd have to omit it. I might make a future video about it. So moving on to the historical era from the 2nd century BC up until the recent past. So in the 2nd century BC, the Qing kingdom successfully conquered the other 6 competing kingdoms, and they also conquered the far south China, the Lingnan region. But their conquest faced fierce resistance from the native people. So the native people fought back and managed to kill the Qin general Tu Sui. So the Qin sent a second invading army, led by generals Ren Xiao and Zhao Tu, and also dug a canal connecting the Li River to the Xiang River, and this canal is still functioning today. And its purpose is to ensure their supplies won't be cut off. So with the help of this canal, they finally subdued the Luoyue people. But they paid a dear price for this conquest. So not only did they lost countless men, but they also shortly afterward their empire also collapsed. And Zhao Tuo seized the opportunity and established his own kingdom called the Nanyue Kingdom, and he assimilated into the local traditions and married his daughter to an influential local leader. So after the Qin came the Han, the peasant rebel Liu Bang, founder of the Han, was bequeathed the land in southwest China, so which is around modern Sichuan and Chongqing, by the rebel leader Xiang Yu, who was of true aristocratic origin and looked down on Liu. So basically, the reason why Xiang Yu gave Liu Bang this land was because at that time southwest China was underdeveloped, was considered a very barbaric region. So that's the reason why Xiang Yu gave Liu Bang this land, so that he might not become a threat. So just send him far away. It's almost like an exile. So send him to a barbarian land, and then yes, he hoped that Liu Bang wouldn't be a problem by sending him far away, but history proved that he was wrong. So Liu quickly realized that this region was quite fertile, with very suitable for agriculture, and this region also had the Bandun natives, the Bandun Man. So Bandun likely referred to some type of large wooden shield, and Man was a term for southern barbarians. And they were also known as the Cong people. And history records suggest that they were a quite warlike people. So that's the reason why Liu Bang recruited them as his mercenaries. And in the ensuing wars to overthrow the Qin, the Bandun mercenary played a pivotal role in defeating Qin general Zhang Han, and this allowed Liu Bang to capture the Qin capital Xianyang earlier than his opponent Xiang Yu. So Xiang Yu later lost the war against Liu and committed suicide. And historical records also mention that the Bandun people performed a certain type of war dance called Ba Yu dance, probably similar to the Hakka dance performed by the Maoris, but the exact details of the dance had been lost with time. So here I found a picture of a 16th century Javanese warrior with shield and spear from the Java island of Indonesia, and it was recorded in a Spanish book, the Boxer Codex. So as you can see, the Javanese warrior is wielding a long spear and with a large wooden shield, like a large wooden shield attached to his arm. So the Bandun people from 2,000 years ago most likely were most likely armed in a similar fashion. So yeah, Han grew into a large empire at the expense of surrounding peoples. So they conquered the northern half of the Korean peninsula from the Proto-Koreans, the Heqi corridor from the Xiongnu or the Hans, and in the south they conquered the Nanyue Kingdom, and the Minyue Kingdom, the Yelang Kingdom, and so on. So all the southern kingdoms and the southern tribes. But their southern conquest wasn't without opposition. They were forced to abandon the Hainan Island due to strong native opposition. In North Vietnam, the Truong sisters rebelled against the Han, but got crushed by a large Han army led by General Ma Yuan. In central Vietnam, a local Cham leader named Chu Lian in Chinese, but Cu Lian, I think it is pronounced as Cu Lian in Vietnamese, successfully rebelled against Han's oppressive rule. either in 237 or no, either in 137 or 192. So sources conflict about the exact dates. So Kulian killed the Han governor of the Xiangling County and established the first Champa kingdom, also known as Lam Up. And apart from the Nanyue royal tomb at Guangzhou, there have been surprisingly very few Qinan Han remains discovered in the far south and the southwest. So it means that the Sinitic influence wasn't that strong, contrary to popular belief. The Sinitic influence wasn't that strong, and we can still see this as a continuation of the local Bronze Age cultures. So after the Han collapse in the 2nd century AD, China entered the era of three kingdoms. So the traditional Sino-century historiography tend to depict the South as pure Sinitic, but this is far from the truth. In fact, only the aristocracy of the southern dynasties were Sinitic, whereas the populace was diverse and included many native peoples. So both the Shu and Wu kingdoms had employed many natives in their armies. The thing with ancient Chinese armies is that a lot of people assume they were conscripts or levies, which was only half true because they also had like some professional troops, like a smaller amount of professional troops or auxiliary troops, mostly recruited from nearby warlike peoples. So usually these mercenary or auxiliary troops are the ones that would decide the outcome of a battle, not the conscripts. So both the Southern Shu and Wu kingdoms in the Three Kingdom period had employed many natives in their armies. In the case of Wu, they mostly employed the Shanyue or Mountain Yue tribes as marines and sailors, and in Shu's case, they employed the natives of Nanzhong as archers and mountaineer troops. So the greatest victory of the Nanzhong troops was that they managed to ambush and kill the Cao Wei general Zhang He in the battle. So Yunnan came to be ruled by native clans and had become gradually detached from the Sinitic domain. So now let's mention a rather interesting people, which were the Liao. So according to records, they originally hailed from the extreme southwest of Jingzhou, which is around modern-day Guizhou and Guangxi. But they later spread to the Bashu region, which is modern-day Sichuan and Chongqing. So they lived in the mountain valleys and built stilted houses. And they were quite good divers and could wait silently underwater and pierce any unsuspecting fish with their knives. So they were quite good swimmers and divers. And they were quite warlike, and feuds between different tribes and clans were common. And they only had shields and spears as weapons and didn't use bow and arrow. So this is a passage from the Beishi, or records of the northern dynasties. So as we can see, they were quite warlike people, and they weren't that organized. They were divided into many hostile tribes and clans. So a brief explanation for those who don't really understand Chinese history. So their exonym Liao shouldn't be confounded with the later Khitan Liao dynasty, as these two peoples were completely unrelated. So in Khitan's case, Liao was a Sinitic rendition of a Khitan word meaning iron, and its exact pronunciation is unknown. However, in the case of the Liao tribesmen of southwest China, linguists generally agree that it was a Sinitic rendition of a Tai-Kadai word that either meant human people, pronounced like Klao, or it was a pronoun that meant we, us. I'm not sure how this was supposed to pronounce, either Liao or Hao. So it's the first personal first person pronoun, meaning we or us. So the Xianbei people of northern Zhou found the Cloud people to be quite hard to deal with, because they were quite warlike and unruly and lived in the mountains and built hill forts. So in the end, the northern Zhou relied on bribery and other divisive tactics and forced them to surrender. By the Tang and Song areas, they had been mostly assimilated by the Sinitic people, and the remaining ones evolved into the numerous Taikadai minorities still found in southwest China today. The reason why the northern Zhou had contact with these people is because they took the southwestern part of China from the Southern Dynasty, so that's why they were able to contact with the Cloud people. So another people called Li, often closely associated with the Cloud, had started to appear in historical records of this time. They were either the predecessors or close relatives of the Lai people in Hainan. At that time, their range covered much of western Guangdong and eastern Guangxi, as well as parts of southern Hunan. So according to the Book of Sui, the Li people were straightforward, candid, hard-working farmers who always kept their promise. And they lived in cave dwellings and had various tribes, each with its own leader. The leader was called Dulao. So as you can see, southern China had many native tribes, and it was far from Sinicized. So the traditional Confucian historiography claimed that southern China had already been thoroughly Sinicized by this time. But as some other historical documents have shown, southern China was far from being Sinicized. And here I also have to mention a well-known female warrior in Chinese history, which is Mrs. Xian. So she lived between 522 to 602. She was of Li descent, and she served three dynasties, Liang, Chen, and Sui. Her greatest feat was the reconquest of the Hainan Island, which had been abandoned since Han times. Today she is worshipped as a goddess by Cantonese people from western Guangdong, as well as by Hainanese people. So here's a statue of Mrs. Xian riding on a horse. So contact with other parts of the world also increased during this time, particularly with Southeast Asia. And a new group of people appeared in China. They were called Kunlun slaves. So the Kunlun doesn't refer to the mountain Kunlun. It mostly it referred to the natives of Southeast Asia, south of the Lam-A kingdom. So it was recorded that they had dark skin and curly hair, and they were highly sought of by the aristocracy of the Sui Tang era due to the fact that they had a good physique. So they were considered to be stronger than average Chinese, and they could also endure hard-working conditions and were quite loyal to their masters. So historians still debate the exact origins of these slaves. They likely had diverse backgrounds, with most coming from insular Southeast Asia, that is from modern-day Malaysia and Indonesia. But some could also come from South India and as far as East Africa. So the Kunlun slaves had various occupations. Some worked as farmers, and others became house guards. Some traveled with Tang merchants and became their translators, and others became Maus. So, according to historical records, there was at least one instance where the Liang dynasty in the south used war elephants from Southeast Asia, driven by Kunlun Maus, to attack the Western Wei. And the northern Xianbei army responded by shooting a barrage of arrows at the elephants, successfully scaring them off and defeating the Liang army. So in the late 9th century, the Tang novelist Pei Xing wrote a short novel about a Kunlun slave named Mo Le, who helped his master Cui Sheng, who was an official's son, to steal his lover, a maid named Hong Xiao, from her master who was another high-ranking official. So Mola was described as highly loyal and possessed amazing physique and martial arts skills. So he was able to fend off guard dogs and jump over high walls, several meters high. However, the high-ranking official later found out Cui Sheng's affair with his maid and brought him to the court. So Cui was very scared and he told everything to the court official. He said that it was all Mola's fault. So the court official sent out 50 armored men to capture Mola, but he was nowhere to be found. And this was one of the earliest novels in Chinese history. So it predated the romance of the Three Kingdoms and the Water Margin by a few centuries. I think this novel is very unknown, both in the West and in East Asia. But I think it's better than the later ones, such as the Romance of the Three Kingdoms or the Water Margin, because it lamented the fate of women and of the poor people, of the lower-ranking peoples under the oppressive, hierarchical Confucian society. So the Confucian society basically divided people into several castes, with the Confucian scholars at the highest level. So the emperor would be the highest, and the Confucian scholars would also hold high positions in the hierarchical system. But the women, children, young people, and minorities um, are at the lowest position. So it's sort of like the caste system of India. So Tang's treatment of the various tribes of southern China was even more horrendous. The most prominent example of this was the dwarfs of the Dao County. So according to the Book of Tang, the Dao County, which is located at the extreme southwest of Hunan, had dwarf peoples. So it was not well documented whether they were simply short in stature or looked different from average Chinese. But they were quite short, and they were often sent to the town court by local officials as pets, and they were kept in cages or jars, just like pet animals. So it was a very horrendous treatment, similar to the slave trade. So around the same time when Tang became the dominant power in East Asia, a mysterious kingdom had formed in southwest China, and this was the Nanzhao Kingdom, which existed from 738 to 902. And in the early 8th century, Yunnan was ruled by 6 tribes, or 6 Zhaos. So Zhao means king in the local language. I think it still means king in the Tai or Lao language. So in 738, the tribal leader Piluo Ge from Mengshe Zhao, which is the southernmost Zhao, united the other 5 Zhaos and founded the Nanzhao, or Kingdom of the Great Meng. So historians debate about the ethnic origins of the ruling elite of Nanzhao. Some say they were Tibeto-Burman, while others say they were Proto-Thais. So personally, I think it was likely a multi-ethnic kingdom. So here we can see the greatest extent of Nanzhao. So it covered quite a large area, from modern-day Yunnan all the way to Thailand and Laos. And here's a Nanzhao painting depicting some dark-skinned bandits attacking a Buddhist monk. But as soon as their weapons hit the monk, they turned into flower petals. And here's a picture showing the general armament and the armor of a Yi warrior. So at first, Tang and Nanzhao had friendly relations, and Nanzhao paid tribute to the Tang. However, this changed in 750 when the second king of Nanzhao, Ge Luofeng, and his wife got humiliated by the local Tang governor. So the Ge Luofeng killed the Tang governor and allied with the Tibetan or the Tubal Empire. So from 751 to 754, Tang sent 3 punitive expeditions against Nanzhao, with troops numbering 60,000 30,000 and 70,000 respectively. Yet Nanzhao was able to defeat all three of them. This was likely one of the underlying causes of the Anlushan rebellion in 755, which severely weakened the town. So in the late 8th and the early 9th centuries, due to the weakened power of the town, Nanzhao began a period of rapid expansion. At its greatest extent, so referring to this picture, it reached southern Sichuan in the north, northern parts of Laos and Thailand in the south, parts of Myanmar and in the west, and parts of Guizhou and Guangxi in the east. In 830, it even sacked the wealthy city of Chengdu. So subsequently, Nanzhao was weakened by internal conflicts and constant wars, and the kingdom came to an abrupt end in 902, when a court official named Zheng Maisi, who was of Sinitic origin. So he usurped the throne and massacred the Nanzhao royal family. He massacred everyone of the Nanzhao royal family. So General Duan Siping restored the order and founded the Dali kingdom in 937, and it remained as an independent kingdom until the Mongol conquest in 1253. So after the collapse of the Tang, so China entered another age of turmoil, as you can see, the Five Kingdoms and 10 Dynasties period. And around this time, North Vietnam was finally able to break free from the Sinitic dominance, ending nearly 1,000 years of Bac Tuo. I think it's pronounced as Bac Tuo. So it means northern dominance. So General Ngo Kun founded the Ngo dynasty in 939 after defeating an invasion from the neighboring southern Han kingdom. So this marked the beginning of the Vietnamese independence. And in the Song dynasty, where southeast China, lower Yangtze region, completed its process of Sinicization and became one of the wealthiest parts of the Song, southwest China, Guangxi, Hainan, parts of Guangdong, Guizhou, and Yunnan, was still seen as rather alien. So there was a book published in the era called Ling Wai Dai Da, which means records from beyond the Nanling mountain range. So the Nanling mountain range is the mountain range separating Guangdong and Guangxi from the Yangtze region. And the mountain range is about 1,000 meters high on average, with its highest peak around 21,000 meters. So records beyond the Nanling mountain range by a Song official named Zhou Qufei, written in the late 12th century. At that time, Guangxi had 5 different types of people, so the northern migrants only accounted for a tiny portion, and they mostly lived in cities, whereas the vast countryside were populated by Tu. So the Tu in Chinese means natives. So the Tu Ren, or natives of unknown origins, and the Liao, the cloud people, similarly to the previously mentioned cloud people. Dan people, which is a boat-dwelling people originating from Guangdong, they still existed in southern China today. And the Shegang people, which were farmers of Min or Fujian origin. So Guangxi was an unruly region prone to rebellions. In the early Tang Dynasty, a massive native rebellion called the Xiyuan Rebellion had already broken out in the region, and it lasted from 756 until 879, so lasted around 100 years. So in the Song, another rebellion broke out there called the Nongzhigao Rebellion. So Nongzhigao, which is native name is Nongji-gao, 1025 to 1055, was a local tribal chieftain of Tai-Kadai origin from the state of Guangyuan on the border between Song and the Vietnamese Lai dynasty. His father Nong Quanfu was already a chieftain and was tributary to the Lai, but in 1029 he decided to become independent and founded the kingdom of Changsheng. This angered the Lai, and they captured and executed Nong Quanfu and the brother of Nongzhigao. So when Nongzhigao inherited the chieftain title, he tried to seek help from the Song dynasty, but the Song refused to help. So this angered him, and he decided to launch a full-scale rebellion against the Song in 1052, and proclaimed himself the emperor of the Great South. So initially, Nong's army had a lot of success. According to Song records, his troops were armed with pavés and javelins. So similarly armed to the previous Lao people, Yes, similar. So were armed with pavés and javelins, and the local Song infantry was no match against them. He captured city after city, and in June 1052, he even attempted to siege Guangzhou. So the siege took 57 days, but ultimately the siege failed due to lack of siege equipment, because Guangzhou was a fairly well-defended city with very high walls. So without siege equipment, it was very hard to take the city. So Nong finally met his end at the Battle of Guirenpu in early spring 1053, when he faced Song cataphracts. So Song cataphract armed with flails. So this was also the first instance where we see flails being used on horseback in East Asian history. So his troops had no answer to the cataphracts, and he got defeated. So he fled to the neighboring Dali kingdom and was executed by the Dali officials in 1055. And today he is still worshipped by some Thai and Nong tribes at the Sino-Vietnamese border. So the Mongol horde came. In the early 13th century, the Mongols swept across the Eurasian continent like wildfire, and countless states and kingdoms had fallen under their hooves. Southern Song was no exception, but they resisted for more than 40 years, so lasted longer than most kingdoms. This was in part due to the terrain advantage, but also in part due to the southern tribal mercenaries under their service, particularly the ones from Bozhou. So this is a map of China before the Mongol conquest. As we can see that China was divided into 4 separate kingdoms. So in the north we have the Jin kingdom, which was founded by the Jurchens, and in the south we have the Song kingdom, which was a continuation of the northern Song. And in the southwest we have the Dali kingdom, and in the northwest we have the western Xia kingdom, founded by the Tangas. So at the time of the Mongol invasion, Bozhou was ruled by a hereditary chief named Yang Jia. The Yang family had been ruling this region since 876. So historical records suggest that the Yang family came from northern China, but I don't think this is very believable. He might very well be a local tribal chieftain of native origin. So Yang Jia supported Song's cause and fought the Mongols. In one battle, the Mongols surrounded the Sichuan governor Zhao Yanna at Qingye Plains. So Yang Jia arrived in time with his Bozhou troops, and he defeated the Mongols and saved the governor. After this battle, Emperor Lizong named Yang's army Xiong Wei. So Xiong means mighty, and Wei means powerful. So this title could be roughly translated to mighty and powerful. And his son Yang Wen continued to resist the Mongols and scored many victories against them. So with the help of Yang Wen and the 2 Bozhou architects, Ran Jin and Ran Pu, the succeeding Sichuan governor Yu Jie built a series of interconnecting mountain forts at Sichuan, and this caused a lot of troubles to the Mongols. Particularly in 1259, the Mongol Khan Meng Ke besieged one of the forts named Diaoyu Cheng, or fishing town. So Diaoyu means fishing and Cheng means town. So it's a fortified city designed by the Bozhou architects Ran Jin and Ran Pu. So the southern natives were quite good at building hill forts. So in 1259, Meng Khan failed to take the fort, and he also died during the siege, either because of disease or because of an injury. In the next two decades, so the fishing town fort stood defiant against the Mongols, and the Mongols launched several large-scale sieges, but they failed to take it. And the Diaoyu city only surrendered in 1279 after Kublai Khan promised to not kill its inhabitants. So this is one of the gates of the Diaoyu fortress. So the fort was built on a hill surrounded by rivers on three sides, making it very hard to besiege. So as you can see, the stairs that you see here were only built for tourism. Before there was no stairs. Before there was only a paved wooden plank, uh, paved wooden plank stairs up the mountains. And shortly before the siege, the Song soldiers inside the fortress would remove the wooden planks, so making the way uphill very difficult for the Mongols. So that's why it was very hard to besiege the city because they had to climb the mountain by hand. So there was no stairways in the past. The stairway that you see here didn't exist. So after the Song fell in 1279, many of these remnants fled to Southeast Asia and continued to resist the Mongols. The Vietnamese Chan dynasty and the Champa kingdom, the Majapahit Empire of Java, the Delhi Sultanate of India, and the Kamakura Shogunate of Japan, and the Bahri Mamluks. I'm sorry if I butcher any of the names. So the Bahri Mamluks of Egypt were the only states in Eurasia to have successfully resisted the Mongol invasions. So I don't have time to go through each of these episodes, so I just selected the Cham in defense against the Mongols as an example. So the old Cham king, Indravarman V, fled to the mountains, but his prince Harijit, together with his southern Chinese advisor, waged guerrilla warfare against the Mongols in the mountains. The Mongol general Sogit II managed to destroy the wooden forts built by the Chams along the coast and even capture their capital Vijaya, but to no avail. In the end, the Chams allied with the Viets and drove the Mongols out. So here we can see a depiction of a Chan warrior and a Mongol warrior. So the Chan is the one on the left and the Mongol is the one on the right. As we can see, the Chan warrior is armed with a very large wooden shield and a spear. So this similar as to the previous southern native mentioned. So there's definitely a sort of connection between them. So in the ensuing Ming Dynasty, the oppression against the southern ethnic groups became even worse. Ming regularly waged wars against the Miao, Yao, and Zhuang peoples, and rebellions were very frequent. One of the most well-known rebellions occurred again in Guangxi, the Dateng Valley Rebellion, and it lasted from 1442 until the end of the Ming, nearly 200 years. In 1573, the Bo people, so the Bo people were the last remnants of the ancient Han Coffin people, rebelled against the Ming. The Ming sent a large army to crush them and eradicated them from existence. To this day, we don't know what language they spoke and which ethnic group they belonged to, but it has been hypothesized that they either spoke Tai-Kadai language or Austroasiatic language. And however, the Ming also employed many of these southern ethnic groups as mercenaries or auxiliary troops, as they found them to be quite fearsome and agile in battle. The Lang Bing or the wolf troops, so Lang means wolf and Bing means troops, from Guangxi and Guangdong were one of the best infantrymen of the Ming, adept at using poisoned crossbows, poisoned javelins, Pavis shield and sabers, and they contributed to the Ming victory against the Japanese Wako pirates. So here is a picture named Wako Tujian that is currently kept in Tokyo, I believe in the Tokyo University Museum. And it shows that it's rather small, maybe you cannot see it clearly, but it shows that the wolf troops were armed with very large shields, and they also armed with a curved polearm, similarly to the dagger axe, and they wore leather armors. And here is a depiction of the poisoned crossbow used by the southern natives. No, it's not a depiction, it's actually an actual artifact, surviving artifact of a poisoned crossbow used by the southern natives. So I will omit the recent history part from the Qing Dynasty onward, and because the Qing Dynasty is mostly well known. And but it's worth mentioning that the Qing continued to employ many southern troops against their enemies. They even used the southern troops against the Zhongars and also against the Russians. Yeah, so the southern troops were quite warlike. So, and here's another important part. Last but not least, I'll give a very brief presentation of why I think Koreanic and Japonic people did not come from southern China and Southeast Asia. So first of all, it's not supported by genetic evidence. This rumor, so the rumor that the Japanese was related to the southern peoples, all started with a joint Sino-Japanese morphological studies on some human remains from Jiangsu in the Han Dynasty. So the original paper concluded that the original paper examined 36 skeletons. So only 3 bear certain resemblance to Yayoi, while the rest don't. So the percentage of similarity is quite low, and I don't think you can draw any conclusion from such a low percentage. So even if you were to randomly pick a group of northern eastern Chinese today, you probably get a higher similarity. So not to mention that Jiangsu isn't situated in the far south or southwest. It's in eastern China. So more recent genetic studies have concluded that neither the Yayoi nor the Zhou-Meng are particularly close to South Chinese and Southeast Asians. So they did share a common ancestor with the southern people, but that was roughly 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, so that was not very close. So it's not supported by linguistic evidence. So the most recent linguistic study showed that the languages of northern Eurasia, so Japonic, Koreanic, Mongolic, Tungusic, and Turkic, all belong to the Trans-Eurasian family proposed by the Belgian linguist Martin Robis. There might be a few words related to agriculture that sound a bit similar, but the words relating to agriculture and technology tend to travel around quite a bit, so this can't really serve as an evidence of the relationships, since these words could very well have been borrowings. And also the grammar is very different. I mean, both Japonic and Koreanic are non-tonal and are subject, object, verb in terms of structure, and have complex agreements and morphology, whereas the majority of languages in South China and Southeast Asia are tonal, SVO, and have very simple or no agreements. I'm aware that certain southern languages, like the Khmer, is non-tonal, but it's still SVO and lack significant morphology, so it's still very different from Japonic and Koreanic, despite being non-tonal. And thirdly, it's not supported by archaeology. Some people would always bring up rice agriculture, but South China and Southwest China were on the receiving end of the spread of rice millet agriculture. So before it reached there, there were hunter-gatherers and relied on tubers and taros. So they weren't able to spread rice agriculture to Japan, and the distance involved is too great. So there were ample evidence to prove that the rice agriculture in Japan came from Korea, because the first traces of rice agriculture in Japan occurred in northern Kyushu. So it's the northern Kyushu is Japan's closest point to Korea, and not in the eastern southern Kyushu facing the East China Sea. So there was a Korean Quora poster named I'm not going to pronounce his name because I most likely would butcher the name. So he made an excellent post on this issue, so you can search for his answer. So according to his Quora profile, he said that he's a Korean history professor, so he must be more knowledgeable than me on this case. So you could search for his post. And also other artifacts and traditions look quite different. For instance, the Kofun period Haniwa figurines. In my opinion, they look more similar to the clay figurines of Qin and Han Dynasty from northern China. You know, the terracotta figurines and the Han Dynasty clay figurines. So there was definitely some continental influence, but I don't think it came from the south, but rather the north. And also remind me of some Turkic figurines, like Turkic stone figurines. And the bronze swords from the Korean Peninsula, as you can see, was like leaf shaped, and willow leaf shaped with double curves, and it looked very different from the previous bronze dagger, from this bronze dagger that we can find in far south China. So it's not of the same origin. And also, I think their usages are different. I think this is just a stabbing sword, while this dagger, this dagger could either be a stabbing sword, and it could also be a throwing knife. I think, judging by its size, because it's much smaller than the Korean sword. So thank you for viewing. Again, this is my first English video. So and I'm not a native speaker of English. So my video might sound a bit difficult to understand for some English speakers. I apologize for that. In the future, I will be continue to make videos about Southern China and Southeast Asia. So stay tuned. And I want to say thank you in the two native languages. So Gyeombai in the Zhuang language and Wazhao in the Hmong language. Thank you so much, guys.